Welcome, everyone. As the person organizing the WyGISC Geospatial Forum series, I have the pleasure of introducing myself. I think that means I can also take myself out to lunch afterwards. Wonder where I'll go. No, it's really great to be here and to kick this off. Trying something a little new this fall, and that we're trying to do kind of a synchronous HiFlex sort of a thing. So it's great to see people in person. It's also great to be able to provide this to folks online. And we're also going to be recording these and making them available in a newly redesigned YouTube channel that we're working on. So that will be available for other folks to see as well. So, I guess I do have the opportunity to sort of take the podium for this first talk, and I am appreciative of that opportunity. So about this talk. So I struggled a little bit with the title of what this should be. WyGISC all grown up. Sometimes I think we're a very mature organization, and sometimes I think we're, still kind of unruly teenagers trying to figure out where we're headed. And other times I think we're maybe like in middle age, like myself, and really scratching my head, wondering where we should go next. But it is what it is, and I think we'll go with it. Maybe the subtitle is a little bit more important. Where do we see ourselves moving forward in this thing we call our geospatial ecosystem? And now the next technical challenge is advancing the slides. All right. So why this talk now? So, I've been director of WyGISC for a long time, 18 years. You could probably call this one of those talks kind of a state of the state talk, right? Sort of reflecting on where we've been and where we're headed. Truth be told, I've only done one or two of those kinds of talks, I think, in a public forum like this. I know we do a lot of this kind of discussion when we have our all hands meetings and things like that, but I haven't done a lot of this sort of sharing it out to the public. So why now? Well, I kind of identify 4 reasons, I guess. We continue to be involved in a field and an affinity group of fields that are continually changing. And we need to be able to be responsive to that. Another reason really is how the mission of WyGISC has changed considerably, especially in the last couple of years. In the fall of 2020, after about 2.5 years of planning, we actually launched a curriculum through the center. This is not typical for a research center to do, but we're doing it. And we've had some growing pains, but overall, I think we're being successful with it. And so that's sort of changing, I think, the way we need to think looking forward. We're also acknowledged a recent milestone. WyGISC turned 25 last year. Things didn't pan out for a big celebration, kind of due to the next slide I'm going to show you. But I think it's important when you hit those kinds of things to look back and look forward and think about how the last 25 years could have been different, what was good about it, maybe what could have been done differently, and how to have those have that kind of assessment shape the future. And then the last thing, specific to our institution, is we are going through a strategic planning process right now, and we're a part of that. And we've actually been engaged in that even before we've seen this draft plan come out. We've been working on strategic planning for almost 2 years now. And so the folks from WyGISC in the room are probably like, oh, is that what he's going to talk about? Just a little bit at the end. And so that's really what I want to do in taking this opportunity. Yeah, so on top of everything else, A global pandemic turned everything upside down, including the way we do these forums, including the way we teach, the way we do research, the way we interact with our colleagues, the way we interact with our students, and how we go about putting on something like this. And so this is kind of a first post-pandemic, even though, you know, the pandemic is still kind of with us in one way or another. And we hope that this will be, you know, a positive thing moving forward with this hybrid sort of approach. Maybe those of us in the room don't actually think of the pandemic so much with this image, but we think of it more with this. Because we're data scientists, because we're geographers, because we're interested in solving geographic problems. And so, you know, the Johns Hopkins COVID-19 map dashboard, you know, at many different levels, it resonated with those of us that are in the data science and technology world. This dashboard won Time Magazine's Best Innovation Award for 2020, and it's really not surprising that it did, because with the impact that it actually had. So we're not alone in thinking about this at this time. So another organization, the University Consortium for Geographic Information Science, UCGIS, turned 25 the year before we did. And so a group of folks from the leadership at UCGIS reflected on this in an editorial in Transactions in GIS. And we'll talk about some of the things that they identified for that organization and the GI science community moving forward, and how that maybe relates to WyGISC here. Another interesting publication, I think, that came out of Harvard, Understanding the Ecosystem of Geospatial Research and Service in Universities. If you work at WyGISC, you should read this article. It's a survey, I think 80-some respondents from the US, Europe, China, Singapore and Hong Kong, maybe, responding to sort of how geospatial centers like WyGISC, where they sit, how they operate, what their primary functions are, what they do well, what they have challenges doing, and so forth. So really insightful, I think, since we're a part of this, group. So I want to do just real quickly, and some of this will not be new to all of you, but I think for some it will, and particularly for the students that are online. I want to talk just a little bit about how we've gotten to where we are today with GI science in general. So, you know, in the academy, in government, in the private sector. And then I'm going to call out one of our new friends, data science. good friend, kind of a good friend. Maybe we're just friending on social media, not sure. We can talk about that, but that's what that's all about. Data science isn't necessarily a geographer like a lot of us are, but we're spending a lot of time with data science. And so just want to talk a little bit about that. And then follow that up with some trends that are happening and what I think our responses are, and then bring that down more specifically to what we're going to be doing here at the center in the next, 6 to 12 months. So GIS really has grown up. It's been around a long time. I think a lot of folks think that GIS is something that's emerged in the last 20 years. Really, the coining of the term by many accounts comes from the development of something called the Canada Geographic Information System. Roger Tomlinson, well-known GIS pioneer, responsible for coining that term. Interestingly enough, and I think this is really interesting to me. In 1967, the National Film Board of Canada did a, 50-minute movie about the Canada GIS. But look at the title, Data for Decision, right? And so, when we talk about data science and data analytics and things like that today, I mean, this was, strongly embedded in some of the foundational ideas that were coming out of geography and really kind of the pioneering area of geospatial technologies in natural resources. We can look at a timeline of this, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it really has been then since the 1960s that we've seen sort of digital geography come about. There's a whole other lecture that somebody can give on the quantitative revolution in geography, which would be very interesting. But it was really in the 1960s when there was kind of this merging of theory and technology that you saw GIS actually become a thing. It became commercialized in the mid-70s. ArcInfo was released in 1981 as the first commercial GIS software. And then things kind of just exploded with the parallel desktop computing explosion. And so over a 20-year period here, you saw the number of people doing GIS just really, really expand. And the field really matured at that time. So some of these professional societies were formed. We have the GIS Certification Institute now that happened in the early 2000s. And so it really kind of became formalized. And then in the last decade or so, it's kind of shifted again. And there are a lot of other landmarks that you could point to along with this. But probably one of the biggest ones is the open source world and kind of where that's taking us now. So just in terms of academics and academia, this has always been a place for innovation in geographic information science and geospatial technology applications. Goes back to the Harvard Lab for Computer Graphics and Spatial Analysis. So this was a group of geographers as well as landscape architects. They played a really important role in sort of the whole overlay method. Landscape architects are doing manual overlays on this thing called a sieve map, where you put these layers together after plotting them out on a dot matrix printer, put them on a light table, and looked at where the light showed through the most. And that was like the manual way of doing spatial overlay. And say that we can't be doing this forever. And so that was part of what led to the Harvard Computer Graphics Lab. Jack Dangerman, founder of Esri, was a student there, as was the founder of Intergraph, and a lot of other folks that kind of really built that commercialization side of things. About 20 years later, major investment by the National Science Foundation with the National Center for Geographic Information and Analysis. This was a huge RFP that went out with all sorts of universities kind of vying for the winning proposal. In the end, the winning proposal was a joint proposal between University of California, Santa Barbara, University at Buffalo, then SUNY Buffalo, and the University of Maine. And over about a 20-year period after that, in terms of innovation in both research and teaching, the NCGIA, I mean, it was really unmatched. I mean, that was the center of what was going on in this discipline. Michael Goodchild, who headed up the NCGIA, is credited with coining the term geographic information science. This idea that there's really sort of a whole synthesis field, right, that's behind the technology, and it's important to acknowledge that, and that there's important research to be done in areas of representation and uncertainty and visualization and those kinds of things. And captured in the NCGIA's Radius project there is this figure that sort of shows GI science as this unique form of information science, right? Because spatial is special, but it's really about creating, handling, storing, and using geospatial or geographic information. And then some of the things on the list on the right side of that diagram are these areas of research that were identified initially with GI science. That didn't mean that the debate didn't continue as to whether this really was a science or not. And so Don Wright, as I think a PhD student at UC Santa Barbara, now the chief scientist for Esri, she wrote a co-authored paper called GIS Tool or Science, and it didn't really solve anything. It just kind of kept the debate going. But it was kind of a sign of, that maybe not everybody was on board with this new idea. The other sort of response was kind of a critical response to this. So a real important book that came out in the mid-90s as well, Ground Truth, the Social Implications of GIS, sort of talking about the political agenda and some of the sort of political origins, I guess, of this kind of technology and its applications. So that raised good discussion as well. And it also led to some really important other work like public participation GIS and volunteer geographic information, and kind of broadening out and the community and making GI science more accessible. So it's not just being done, you know, by the USGS and the Defense Mapping Agency and, you know, everybody else had to sort of follow in their footsteps. It really sort of raised questions that opened up the field in a lot of ways. Incidentally, 4 years after GI science term was coined, WyGISC was founded. So it started as Spatial Data and Visualization Center as an NSF EPSCoR grant, but we were right in the middle of that kind of growth in the field. So kind of parallel to NCGIA was, you know, the center provides this great foundation, but how do we reach out to other academic institutions? And that really led to the University Consortium for Geographic Information Science, UCGIS. I'm already probably behind schedule on my talk, but UCGIS, as I said, turned 25 the year before we did. And over the years has been really instrumental in sort of like capturing and presenting research agendas for the field. The GIS&T body of knowledge originally came out, I think, in 2006. Has really been an important resource for curriculum development and teaching and that kind of thing. The other piece of it, too, was this policy piece and giving academics a voice, I guess, in places where they felt that place-based science and place-based decision support and the related technology had a place in policy. And then some other stuff started to happen, which has influenced our field and I think has influenced our center. This idea that, you know, you don't have to be a GIS expert necessarily to do GIS. And so, you know, a name is put to this idea of neo-geography. So it's sort of like the layperson, maybe in a different field with a different set of skill sets, doing geography with geospatial tools. And I think for some in our field, that felt a little bit threatening, right? Like, hey, you don't have the chops to be doing this, you know, this is our domain, right? And why are you using that web Mercator map projection in all of your web apps? And there are reasons for that, and there are reasons still today, but there was this kind of shift in that these kinds of tools and practices moved outside of the formal discipline and really became, you know, consumer GIS, embedded GIS, you know, a lot of different ways to think about it. We don't even know we're doing GIS behind the scenes here. We don't even know that there's, you know, a networking algorithm that a geographer developed that's probably tied into Waze or Google Maps or, you know, whatever routing scheme you happen to be using in your app. And then kind of, I'm not going to talk about a lot, I'm not going to talk at all, really, about sort of GIS in government. But do want to say a few words about the business of GIS and sort of where that ecosystem has gone. And so these are things like software developers, data providers, software as a service, consultants, kind of are all a part of this kind of private sector side of things, right? But mixing them in with other groups as well. And so if you see, I don't know if my pointer will show up here, you know, and we kind of look at the market for geospatial. There's the commercial companies here. There's the professional user domains that they're supporting. There's still the government agencies. And then there's just this kind of base level sort of mapping that's happening sort of across all of those sectors is the way I would characterize it. Kind of converging, though, into a couple of key areas identified by this particular industry group, and that being location analytics, and particularly agriculture, engineering, and construction, this kind of engineering development, BIM kind of arena that is seeing a lot of growth right now. Natural resource applications are still there, but they're not so much front and center in the mind of geospatial. And so here's a little bit different way to look at this and consider it. The geospatial industry and digital ecosystem. So we've got four kind of different colored columns here. We've got geospatial technologies, we've got facilitations, we've got processes, and we've got delivery platforms. It's a little bit fuzzy. Can folks in the back see it? Okay, yeah. So, when I look at these, none of these really are strictly geospatial, right? Like there are other folks doing this. There are other folks working in open data. There are other folks doing data standards in the blue column. There are other folks that are looking at automating workflows and doing business intelligence. The delivery platforms aren't just the domain of geospatial. Maybe the column on the far left, the mustard colored ones are sort of the geospatial pieces, but the rest of it really crosses over into a lot of other sectors of information and communication technologies. And then you have the drivers down at the bottom. The Internet of Things, this sort of everything is connected in different types of sensors. AI, machine learning, the cloud, getting this out there to everybody through broadband and things like that, and then of course big data. And so I think this is a useful diagram to think about because it's probably not the typical diagram that a geographer would look at necessarily, but I think it really does sort of highlight this idea that geospatial has really become a very open sort of an ecosystem. And that it really isn't in the domain of any one set of professionals. And so then there's big data and there's data science. And I won't say any more about it than just this one slide, except you can see here's a partnership ad from the Chronicle with one particular institution talking about data science and the need for data scientists, right? And I think, again, as data science has really sort of come on the scene, those of us in geospatial over the last, 5, 6 or more years have really sort of struggled like, so is geospatial data science just sort of another flavor of data science, or is it its own thing? And how can we sort of work in that space and still sort of claim that spatial is special? Like those are questions that make me scratch my head. But the branding and the recognition and the identification of a field like data science, I mean, when parents come with their kids to do a campus visit and they talk about, oh, what might you major in? Most likely the parents aren't whispering in their ear, geospatial. But they might be whispering data science, right? And so I think there's kind of a branding and labeling thing there that even just at that sort of superficial level we need to be thinking about. So are we keeping pace? Well, you type in race or pace into the designer in PowerPoint and you get so many options, but I went to cycling. So this is kind of a question, right? And I think it's an important one to ask for WyGISC, for what we do in our research and our collaborations and the curricula that we deliver, and in the partnerships that we have both on campus and across the state. So I discovered this paper a few years ago, and then it was actually cited in the UCGIS at 25 article as well. Our GIS is too small. Author of this is Mark Gagan. I think he's from New Zealand originally. He spent a lot of time at Penn State in the Department of Geography there at the GeoVista lab. He's now the director of a center in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Auckland. He published this 4 years ago in the Canadian Geographer. And sort of what he says in this paper is that we don't really have a platform to support geographic research. And granted, you know, he wrote this is an essay 5 years back now, almost. But that was his first point. And it's also, he said, sort of the way we've always done GIS and GIS systems has sort of been driven by sort of the traditional map model, right? Like we're always thinking about static things like features and things like that. And so the platforms that we do have are not very dynamic, right? And so that's kind of the other one. And then this idea that, you know, kind of because of that, it limits sort of the way we do representation. It limits sort of how we're able to contribute to these kinds of contemporary geographic issues that are being dealt with today in science and in government and in other sectors. And he kind of talks about it this way. He compares it to sort of the informatics world, right? And he talks about this idea of X informatics. X meaning you can kind of put anything you want in front of that, right? So X informatics is the study of the analytical methods, tools, and information architecture associated with a given research domain. So we have bioinformatics, right? We have astroinformatics. We have, and I had them all listed in my head before I came downstairs. You know, you can probably fill in the blank and think of many others, right? But our field, we didn't really go that route. We didn't really go with geoinformatics. We sort of put our flag in the ground with geographic information science, right? And yeah, you hear geoinformatics and whatnot, but we sort of still sit and make claim to GI science as being something kind of bigger. And so then he says, you know, by and large, the GI science community does not see its primary role as providing the platform and methods to support geographical inquiry for the rest of the geographical research community, preferring instead to pursue a more independent research quest. And so, you know, what he's saying here really is that the GI science folks, you know, they're not always supporting other geographers or supporting other people in different domains that are doing geographic research. And he'd like to see that change. Love to get him here as a speaker. The paper is great. Not a lot of citations, but maybe because of the title. But really, again, another insightful paper that is a different perspective sort of on the field. But, you know, this is actually changing. So that was written 5 years ago. And so we're kind of starting to see this change. And one of these changes that we can point to is this new investment in NSF at a center at University of Illinois called iGuide, the Institute for Geospatial Understanding through Integrated Discovery and Environment, led by Xiaowen Wang. So some of you in the room know Xiaowen. We've invited him to come and be a speaker right after the AAG is held in Denver at the end of March. And so we hope to have him here for 2 or 3 days to talk a little bit more about what this is. And I can't help but think that, you know, maybe when they were writing the proposal for this, they had read Mark Gagan's paper and were sort of, you know, trying to address this idea of we need a cyber infrastructure, we need a platform to be able to support geographic problem solving. And so, you know, I think this is definitely a step in the right direction. Another thing that's been identified that the GI science community could do more of is partnering and partnerships. And we're also seeing a change here. And so, you know, a couple of documents that we have. So here's an international organization talking about public-private geospatial collaborations. Our own Federal Geographic Data Committee and National Geospatial Advisory Council has advancing the NSDI through public-private partnerships. And then very recently, just launched in the last year, a good example of this in St. Louis is the Taylor Geospatial Institute. So centered around kind of a hub for national geospatial intelligence and infrastructure already in place by the NGA, but expanding out to include a lot of academic institutions, government entities, but really very much, you know, not funded by NSF. It's a private donor that funded this institute. Actually, I think the heir to enterprise car rental. And so really an example of, you know, this kind of shift to partnering with the private sector. And so, you know, just kind of the last part of this then, where does this leave us? Well, we are, you know, kind of in a time of transition on campus. Here on campus, there have been a lot of reorganization. There's been a lot of reorganization happening across the campus. Over the hill in Cheyenne, in state government, they're continue to sort of grapple and deal with how best to do state government coordination and coordination with cities and counties and other groups as well. And so they're reconsidering some new ideas there as well. And then we have strategic planning that's happening. And so this is really a time of transition for us. And so, like I said, we've been working on this. So we've been working on this for the last, you know, year and a half or so. The university, President Seidel, put forth a set of strategic pillars that were important in his mind for moving the university forward. And I think those resonate with our mission, you know, the digital pillar that you see here, the entrepreneurial pillar, the interdisciplinary pillar, and the inclusive pillar. The second sort of icon there at the bottom, building a digital statewide network, you know, and geospatial has always been a part of that and always been a part of what WyGISC has done. And so that's kind of a cornerstone for us, I think. And so how do we sort of grapple with this? And so, you know, one term that I like is this idea of a strategic compass. Doesn't necessarily have to be a complete plan, but sort of, you know, a direction that we know we can head and that we have opportunity to be successful. And so, you know, what our environment will be like in the future is ambiguous. How can we best position ourselves so that we'll be prepared to, one, take advantage of unexpected opportunities when they arise, remain resilient in the face of unanticipated challenges, and adapt so that we're going to be relevant, you know, moving forward. That's a very general sort of statement, something you would probably find in a leadership book, and it is from a leadership book. But I think there's a reason it's in there, and it comes out of probably a bestseller among academic administrators anyway, because it really sort of provides a place to be flexible and adaptable and still achieve success. So how do we maybe sort of do that? It was so nice outside on my walk in this morning. I thought I'd better take a picture of the WyGISC banner outside. so blue skies, but that's really our mission right there. And it's always been our mission, advancing the application of geographic information science and technology since 1996. And so in our planning, we've talked about this idea of the hedgehog concept and really about where you put your resources, right? hedgehog can be good at really one thing, and it's really good at it, taking care of itself, rolling up in a ball, staying safe, moving forward, and it's good at that one thing, right? But what sort of questions should we be asking in order to decide how we're going to invest in ourselves, in our unit, in our university? So, what can we be best at? I think it's a question we should always be asking ourselves. What are we deeply passionate about in our work? And then sort of what drives the economic engine? And it's different in the social sector than in the private sector, right? And so we need to look at different ways of how we do that and support what we want to accomplish. And then, so I'll just end with 5 things of looking forward and how we might accomplish this. And just a quick slide on each of these. So first of all, interdisciplinary. I'm a geographer. There's a lot of folks that are geographers in the room. We all do geography, whether we're geographers or not. And I think even in an interdisciplinary sort of approach, there's a place to sort of ground this in the geographical sciences, in this idea of applying technology to solve geographic problems. And the national academies recognize it and have explored this, sort of identifying strategies, transformative research. And I think it can still provide a good foundation for us moving forward. Platforms. So our GIS is too small, right? But we're addressing that with things like iGuide at a very national level. Here within WyGISC, with Shannon's team and his partnership with Jared Merkel in zoology, this devise cyber infrastructure platform, I think, is moving us toward addressing some of the things that Mark Gagan pointed out as shortcomings in the geoscience approach. Partnerships. There's a lot of things I could have listed here. Austin, your work in working with NASA and the NASA development program, I think, is a great example of that. Those of us in the room that are working with the 9H Foundation and that kind of public-private partnership, a state initiative involving UW and the community colleges, the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. I mean, digital infrastructure and technology is right there, and there's places, there's opportunities for geospatial in that. And then diversity. So super excited. I missed the little announcement right at the end of WyGISC last week, but Jalinda, I heard that you were able to announce that Wyoming now has a state Women in GIS chapter. And so I'm super excited that WyGISC has been able to support that with some of its foundation dollars, and really looking forward to seeing how that can support women in the geospatial community. And then super exciting, Dawn Wright, I mentioned her as being the lead author on that paper, GIS software or science, I think. Back in the mid-90s, she was an academic at Oregon State, then went to Esri. She's the chief scientist at Esri. Her nickname is Deep Sea Dawn. First Black to go down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench on the Challenger Deep, and exploring some new sensor technology that she was able to operate in that expedition. We need more people of color in our field. We need more women, and we need to do better at that, and we need to work at it every day. But Dawn is an inspiration to all of us in what she's accomplished in the geospatial, both in academia, private sector, and just in the way she kind of connects those communities together. And then the last is some institutional alignment. And that's really where we're headed now, with a very concrete sort of a thing, and our current proposal to become a part of UW's new School of Computing. To me, this addresses a lot of the things that I just talked about. This kind of things that are happening in affinity fields like data science and AI and machine learning and scientific computation, public-private partnerships and being more about that, and really sort of taking spatial and kind of breaking down some of these boundaries and barriers that have been there in the past. And so we're excited about that, and we'll be working on that, here over the next few months and hoping to make it a reality soon. And then the work doesn't end, then the work just kind of begins, because then we're part of a whole new adventure with all sorts of new opportunities. I'll last 5 minutes, or maybe a little bit less. Happy to answer any questions that you might have, and thanks for your attention. Everybody's so hot in the room.
Awesome. What about some specific challenges with this kind of split academic versus outward facing center, and how common is that in the country or throughout the world? Always we have these different kind of entities here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like sort of with our academic mission and the sort of things that the capacity building things that we've long done in the state. Yeah. I think sort of that mix is yet to be not necessarily sorted out, but I think sort of the details of what that will look like. I was at the National States Geographic Information Council meeting in Portland last week, which is a meeting of all the state GIS coordinators. And I used to go to that meeting a long time ago. And when I first started going to that meeting, there were a lot of academics there because oftentimes they were sort of providing things that state government couldn't at the time. Since that time, state governments have been able to build their own capacity and now in a lot of places are doing things that they used to have to ask universities to do for them. That said, every state is unique, I think, and there probably are still today. Gosh, Curtis did some of the research on this for me. I think something like 15 or 16 states where the university is very still much involved in data management and data distribution and data clearinghouse kinds of things. As a land-grant university, I still think we have that kind of extension and engagement sort of role. So whether that's doing information and technology transfer with training and different things like that, or consultations, or doing research, kind of like with the partnership with the NASA Develop piece, right? And that's kind of cool too, because that's now kind of crossing over into the academic side as well. So I still see these things continuing. And I think just a little bit more of a diversity in the mix of activities that we do. Thanks. Yep. Anybody else? Anybody online?
Hey, Jeff, this is Karen.
Marco just asked, what do you envision as WyGISC's core for the hedgehog concept?
Sorry, I clicked a button and there. As the core for the hedgehog. So to me, that core, that intersection of what we do best, our passion, and sort of what the needs are, because that really drives resources in my mind. To me, the core at all of that is this idea of building and maintaining and growing these spatial information infrastructures. There's different names for them, right? Cyber infrastructure, SDIs, whatever you might want to call it. A lot of acronyms, lots of jargon. But to me, at the core, It's about maintaining that infrastructure and being able to apply it in such a way that you're moving from data to useful information to actually new knowledge, and then turning that into a knowledge base where we're actually a little bit wiser for it at the end, and can apply it in different sorts of settings, whether it's science, whether it's policy, what it might be. But to me, that's really at the core. And then I'll just say that's not just hardware and software and how fast your network is. That's people too, and that's investing in the human part of the infrastructure.
Another question from Karen: is it reasonable to think that being involved in the School of Computing will help restore stable funding for the GeoHub?
That's a very specific question. Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it certainly creates more opportunities for the potential for that to happen. And one tie-in here, I think, is with the Wyoming Innovation Partnership and this idea of the Wyoming Data Hub, which isn't just about geospatial, but which geospatial can be a very central part to that. And so I think if that sort of goes, hand in hand with becoming a part of the School of Computing and being more involved in the work that School of Computing is doing with the Innovation Partnership, then yes, I think that does create opportunity for that.
Questions.
And it looks like we're out of time. So thank you all again for your attention. I really enjoyed sharing these thoughts with you, and have a great afternoon.